Okay, so we've made it this far. We have our texture map. I still got some extra red over here, and as you'll see, I've imported in a couple of other textures just to kind of fill in for areas I may need. I've created some of this repeating brick pattern over here, so we can reuse that if we need it somewhere, or we can just make a whole wall out of that. And I've gotten some shingles, this wood, and then I got this white area because we have these ledges and this white trim and steps, and so we may end up needing that somewhere. And we can go in here and just look at what the texture looks like. And, so this is the texture map we'll be saving out. Right. So if I go File and Save As, and I'm just going to save that as a target file called modularmap.tga. Okay, so once we have that, let's go into Maya, and so let me turn the grid back on just so we can see this. Show grid. We have a 20 by 20 grid. So what we're going to do in Maya is we're going to create a plane that also has a 20 by 20 grid. So I'm just going to scale this up. Right now it's a 10 by 10 grid, and so I'm just going to turn that up to 20 by 20. What we also want is we want each of these faces to be 1 unit big. Okay, so we can scale it up to try to figure out that number, but we actually know because we're on a scale of 10, it's probably going to be 1,000, and we're right. So we scale all that to 1,000, and now each of those faces will line up perfectly with one of the grid squares. I'm going to right click on here. I'm going to assign a new material. It could be whatever type of material you want. It could be a blend, it can be a Lambert. And into the color channel, I'm going to map that target file we just created. So modular map target, hit open. If I hit 6, we should be able to see it in here, right? And so what I'm going to do, hold down J to constrain the rotation. Go ahead and get that at 90 degrees. We're going to move this up here and look at it. So now we have this plane that has all these different parts on it, and all of these sections of texture should line up pretty closely with where the material is. Actually, I'm seeing a seam going on right there that maybe I should go in and fix really quick while I have the chance. And so this is just part of what we may have to do with this. Do a little bit like that. Enter. I'm going to do it the other way too. Just a little bit. And then I'll just save the file again. File. Save as. Target. And I'm just updating this image. Okay. So that's fine. So if I go in here, I can reload that to kind of clear that up. So you're going to run into that, but luckily we can just keep updating the map whenever we need to. So this is what we have, and luckily all of these little areas that we want to make a whole piece line up perfectly along these faces. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, just so I'll have this again later, I'm just going to hit Control D to duplicate it, and then I'm going to hit Control H to hide one of them. And basically I'm just keeping me a backup of it just in case I need it later. Okay, so there's them, and I got the backup there. So we're going to be working on this P-plane one. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to start grabbing faces of the sections that I know are going to be their own piece. Right? And so when I grab that face, I can go to Mesh and Extract, and now it's its own mesh, right? So we're just going to do that for each of these pieces that we know needs to be its own modular piece. So we know that's one. Mesh, Extract, and we can just keep doing this. In fact, we can hit G to repeat the process. That's G. Okay. I'm not going to worry too much about this wooden piece, and you'll see why later. But all these individual sections I'm just extracting out as whole pieces. And then in this case, sure, let's go ahead and grab this whole wall. G. Now what we're going to have left is this piece here. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And then what we have for each of these is their own individual face, right? Now, the problem with this is actually not that big of a deal, but they're all kind of the pivot points are everywhere. And there's also another problem is that since we've been extracting, now it's just in this terrible hierarchy of like groups because of the history, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab everything. I'm going to say edit, delete by type, history, and that's going to extract some of it. I'm going to grab it all again, and we hit Control G. And what that's going to do is it's going to suck it out of those groups and put it in its own group here, so I can grab them more easily, and then just move those back out, or I can leave it in this group if I want to, and just move this entire group out of here, and then I can just delete this mesh. And so we can call these modular pieces. PIE, PEI. How come I don't know how to spell pieces? Yeah, I spelled it right the first time. Okay, so we have all of these. Now, what we need to do next is we need to get the pivot point somewhere reasonable. And so for each of these pieces, I could just grab it and say modify center pivot, but that's just going to put it in the center. And so I want to have the pivot point all in the same location for each of these pieces. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the bottom left-hand corner. And so I can do this a couple different ways. I can hit insert, and then I can hold down V while I snap it to that bottom corner, and then hit insert again. Now the shortcut to that is actually to hold down D, which will allow us to toggle on that, and also V, and I can just do that really quickly for each of them. So D, V, snap, D, V, snap, D, V, snap. So this is allowing us to reposition our pivot on all of these to the bottom corner of the model. Okay, once we have all that, I'm going to select everything. I'm going to say modify. No, I'm not going to do that yet. I'm just going to grab everything, and then holding down X, I'm just going to snap it to the origin of the grid. Okay? And so now we have these individual modular pieces that are all at the origin of the grid, and we can look at them one at a time. And so let's start off with this guy and see what we have here. So it's that piece, and if we look at the height of our character versus the height of this object, we can kind of see that that's about right. So what we're going to do is one at a time we're going to start giving some depth to these. Okay. And we're just going to do this for a few of them and then take that into Unreal so we can see what we can actually make with that. Okay, so these are each their own individual pieces. So let's just start off with the brick wall. So we need a brick wall, and we need sort of a consistent amount of thickness on this thing. So let's just grab all of these faces, right? And I'm just going to say edit mesh, extrude. And let's do our thickness at about 50. So the biggest thing with this is we just have to determine what we want our thickness to be. Crap. Sorry, let me go back and try this again. Select them all. Edit mesh. Extrude. Okay, and in this case, I want everything to have sort of a base thickness of, let's say, I'm going to say, let's do 30. And actually, if we want to make it pretty, yeah, let's just say 30. Okay, and so we can see that thickness is always going to be at 30 on this. And so now we just have this wall that is 30 units thick, and we can take this into Unreal and use it as a modular wall. Now, when I say modular, that's kind of confusing to some people, so let's look at what that actually means. That means that because we have this thing based off of the grid, let me actually do this. Because we have this based off of the grid, right, I can hold down X and snap to the grid, right, and then if I wanted to duplicate it, I can also snap that to the grid. Now, since the entire thing is based off the grid, if I snap that appropriately, it should all line up and we have a repeating wall. Now we'll see that we are going to get some areas where the texture is not aligning perfectly, and sometimes that's a big deal and sometimes it's not. In this case it may or may not be, and so we may have to go back in and do some texture work to make that a cleaner alignment, and if so, that's not a big deal. So now that we have this, though, we have to do a couple of things, or we can do a couple of things in terms to clean this up, right? One of them is I don't necessarily need all of these faces, right, or edges. I mean, so I could just go through here, select them all. Control D. We actually still have the same object, right? Depending on what you want to do, you may not always need this back face too, but just to be safe, I'm going to leave it for now. If I decide I need to reduce more, I can take those off, right? But I can now grab these faces, which have really terrible UVs on them, right? And the reason for that is if I go look at my model into the window UV texture editor, you'll see that what's actually going on is they're both sharing, like those edges are actually, they're not facing us, they're kind of at an angle to us, right? And so I can grab these faces now and I can remap those if I wanted to. So I could go to create UVs, do automatic mapping, and what we're going to get now is we're going to get those UVs over here, right? And so I can grab those, I can move those around however I want to, including I could scale them if I need to, and rotate them to get them within the sort of the parameters of this wall. And so if we look over here, we can start to see, especially if I go to UV mode, we can start to see how this is going to line up for us, and we can do a little work to make this look the way we want it to, right? So one of the things is maybe I don't want it to be completely maybe do like that. Select shell, like that. There we go. So there's much worse options than this. So this isn't bad. We can always still adjust our UVs a little bit if we need to. But what we have is a repeating brick wall pattern now that we can reuse wherever we want to. Okay, so we'll just call this brick wall, or Okay, and I'm just going to take this back to the origin, 000, and then under my channel box you'll see I have a lot of information here I don't need. I'll go modify, freeze transformation, then edit, delete by type, history. So I'm going to go and stop this video now, and then I'll show you a little bit more of an elaborate modular piece that we can build after this that will give you a little bit more control of some of the depth of the scene. So I'll be back here in just a bit.